The death penalty remains one of the most debated and controversial aspects of the American justice system. While some view it as a necessary punishment for the most heinous crimes, others argue that it is outdated, inhumane, and flawed. Despite ongoing legal battles and growing opposition, executions continue to take place in several states across the U.S. In 2025, multiple prisoners have already been executed, and more are scheduled to face their final moments on death row. Some spent decades awaiting their fate, exhausting every possible appeal, while others faced a much shorter journey from sentencing to execution. Their crimes were brutal, their trials were long, and in some cases, their last words offered haunting final messages to the world. Today, we will take a look at all the prisoners executed in the United States in 2025 so far. We will explore their crimes, the details of their executions, their final words, and their last meals. Some of these cases have drawn national attention, while others have been carried out with little media coverage. Regardless of public awareness, each execution represents the end of a life, often after years of legal battles, personal remorse, or defiant resistance. This is a sensitive and disturbing topic, so viewer discretion is advised. Let's begin. Marion Bowman Jr. was executed on January 31, 2025 in South Carolina by lethal injection at the age of 44. He was convicted for the 2001 murder of Candy Martin. Bowman and his legal team argued that key evidence was withheld and that witnesses against him were unreliable. Despite maintaining his innocence, he was executed after more than 2 decades on death row. His last words expressed love for his family and supporters, emphasizing the humanity of those on death row. His last meal was not publicly documented. Stephen Lawayne Nelson was executed on February 5, 2025, in Texas by lethal injection at the age of 37. He was convicted for the 2011 murder of Reverend Clint Dobson during a robbery. Nelson beat and suffocated the pastor in his church and spent over a decade on death row. His last words were, "I'm not afraid. I am at peace. Let's go, Warden." He then said the word love to his wife, who was present in the witness room. His last meal was not publicly documented. Demetrius Terrence Frazier was executed on February 6, 2025, in Alabama, by nitrogen hypoxia at the age of 52. In 1991, Frazier broke into the apartment of Pauline Brown in Birmingham, Alabama, where he raped and murdered her when she was 19 years old. At the time of his execution, he was also serving a life sentence in Michigan for another murder. His last words were, "I want to apologize to the family and friends of Pauline Brown. What happened to her should never have happened." His final words before the execution began were, "Let's go." His last meal request included a Taco Bell meal with a 5-layer burrito, a chicken supreme chalupa, crunchy beef tacos, chips with salsa, and a Mountain Dew. James Dennis Ford was executed on February 13, 2025 in Florida by lethal injection at the age of 64. He was convicted for the 1997 murders of Gregory and Kimberly Malnery while they were fishing in Charlotte County, Florida. The couple was brutally attacked in front of their 22-month-old daughter, who survived. Ford did not speak before his execution, but left a written note saying, "Hugs, prayers, love. God bless everyone." His last meal request included steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potatoes, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. Richard Lee Tabler was executed on February 13, 2025 in Texas by lethal injection at the age of 46. He was convicted in 2004 for the murders of Mohammed Amin Ramouni and Haitham Zayed, linked to a dispute at a nightclub. He was also accused of 2 additional murders during a series of crimes in Killeen, Texas. In his final words, Tabler said, "Not a day goes by that I don't regret my actions. I had no right to take your loved ones away. I hope and pray that you can forgive me for what I have done. No amount of apologies will ever bring them back." And if you feel that this is what you need for closure, I pray that it helps you find it," he added in his final statement before being executed. So far, the 5 individuals previously mentioned have been the only ones executed in the United States in 2025. However, death row remains filled with many more inmates, each awaiting their inevitable fate as their execution dates draw closer. Some have spent decades behind bars, exhausting every legal appeal in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable, while others have resigned themselves to their punishment, facing their final days in isolation. Regardless of the circumstances, the reality remains the same. The clock is ticking, and soon more names will be added to the list of those who have faced the ultimate penalty. The following are the next scheduled executions for this year. Blaine Milam is set to be executed on April 10, 2025, in Texas by lethal injection. His crime remains one of the most disturbing child murder cases in the state's history. In 2008, he was convicted for the horrific killing of 13-month-old Amora Carson, a crime he and his partner claimed was part of an exorcism. The brutal nature of the murder shocked the nation, and his conviction led to one of the harshest sentences possible. Milam has spent 17 years on death row, fighting numerous appeals, but with his execution date now confirmed, his time is running out. As the day approaches, his last words and final meal have yet to be revealed. Brad Keith Sigmon, a 67-year-old inmate on South Carolina's death row, is set to be executed on March 7, 2025, by firing squad. This marks the first time in 15 years that this method will be used in the United States. Sigmon was convicted in 2001 for the brutal murders of his ex-girlfriend's parents, David and Gladys Lark. Armed with a baseball bat, he viciously attacked them inside their Greenville County home. After killing them, he kidnapped his ex-girlfriend at gunpoint. She managed to escape despite Sigmon firing at her during the pursuit. Following his conviction, he was sentenced to death and has spent more than 2 decades on death row. In July 2024, South Carolina passed a law allowing executions by firing squad, giving condemned inmates a choice between lethal injection, the electric chair, or firing squad. Due to concerns over the possibility of suffering caused by lethal injection, Sigmon chose to die by firing squad. His legal team has challenged this decision, arguing that it constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. They have also criticized the state for its lack of transparency regarding lethal injection drugs and procedures. Despite these legal efforts, his execution remains scheduled to proceed at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. At this time, no details about his final words or last meal have been released. David Leonard Wood, known as the Desert Killer, is set to be executed on March 13, 2025, in Texas by lethal injection. At 67 years old, he has spent over 3 decades on death row after being convicted of one of the most chilling series of murders in El Paso's history. Wood was found guilty of murdering 6 young women between June and September 1987, burying their bodies in shallow graves scattered across the desert landscape on the outskirts of the city. His victims, ranging in age from 14 to 24, vanished under mysterious circumstances, only for their remains to be discovered months later, sending shockwaves through the community. For years, Wood maintained his innocence, claiming that he was wrongfully convicted. However, prosecutors painted a different picture, describing him as a manipulative and sadistic predator who lured vulnerable young women before taking their lives. Despite multiple appeals, including attempts to argue intellectual disability and requests for additional DNA testing, Wood's conviction and sentence remained upheld. The courts have consistently ruled against him, rejecting every effort to overturn his death sentence. His execution, now officially scheduled, marks the final chapter in a case that has haunted Texas for decades. As the date draws near, details about his last meal and final words remain undisclosed. However, if history is any indication, his final moments will be closely watched by the families of his victims, seeking closure after decades of grief and uncertainty. Christopher Sepulvado, an 81-year-old inmate on Louisiana's death row, is scheduled to be executed on March 17, 2025. His case is significant, as it marks Louisiana's first execution in over 15 years and the state's first use of nitrogen hypoxia as a method of capital punishment, a controversial alternative to lethal injection. Sepulvado was sentenced to death in 1993 for the brutal murder of his 6-year-old stepson, Wesley Allen Mercer. In 1992, he submerged the child in a scalding hot bathtub, causing severe burns that led to his death. The horrifying nature of the crime shocked Louisiana, and he was swiftly convicted. For decades, Sepulvado fought his sentence, arguing that he was denied fair legal representation and challenging the execution methods used by the state. His case became central in debates about Louisiana's death penalty system, with supporters arguing that his age and declining health should spare him. However, after years of delays, the state is now moving forward with his execution. With the use of nitrogen hypoxia, Louisiana follows Alabama in adopting this method, which some argue is more humane, while others warn of its ethical concerns and lack of testing. As the execution date nears, Sepulvado's final meal and last words remain unknown. Whether he expresses remorse or maintains his innocence, his execution will mark the end of one of Louisiana's most controversial death row cases. Aaron Brian Gunches is scheduled to be executed on March 19, 2025, by lethal injection in Arizona. Convicted in 2007, he was sentenced to death for the 2002 murder of Ted Price, the ex-husband of his girlfriend. Gunches shot Price multiple times and left his body in the Arizona desert. His arrest came after a series of violent incidents, including the attempted murder of a state trooper during a high-speed chase. What makes Gunches' case unusual is that he has repeatedly requested his own execution, stating that he fully accepts his punishment. However, legal battles over Arizona's execution protocols delayed the process for years, leading to multiple setbacks. Now, with a death warrant officially issued, his execution is set to proceed. As the date approaches, many wonder what his final moments will be like, what he will say in his last words, and what he will choose for his final meal. After more than 2 decades on death row, Aaron Gunches' time is finally running out, and soon he will face the punishment he has long claimed to be ready for. Wendell Arden Grissom, a 56-year-old death row inmate in Oklahoma, is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on March 20, 2025. His conviction stems from a brutal home invasion in November 2005 near Watauga, where he and an accomplice, Jesse Johns, broke into the home of 26-year-old Drew Kopf, intending to steal valuables. The crime turned deadly when Grissom shot and killed 23-year-old Amber Matthews as she shielded children from the attack. He then shot Kopf multiple times, though he survived and later testified against Grissom. In 2008, Grissom was sentenced to death for first-degree murder, while Johns received life without parole. Prosecutors portrayed him as a ruthless killer, and despite his attorney's claims that he suffered from brain damage and impulse control issues, his appeals failed. On February 5, 2025, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied his clemency request, sealing his fate. With his execution now imminent, final details such as his last meal and words remain unknown. Unless a last-minute intervention occurs, he will be executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, marking the state's first execution of the year. Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a 41-year-old inmate on Texas's death row, is scheduled to be executed on April 23, 2025, by lethal injection. Mendoza was convicted in 2005 for the brutal abduction, sexual assault, and murder of 20-year-old Rochelle O'Neal Tollison in Farmersville, Texas. The crime shocked the small community and left a lasting impact on those who knew the young woman. On March 17, 2004, Rochelle was reported missing after her mother found her home in disarray, her infant daughter left alone. The investigation quickly led authorities to Mendoza, who confessed to kidnapping Tollison, assaulting her, and ultimately taking her life. He strangled and stabbed her before attempting to destroy evidence by burning her body and disposing of it in a creek bed. Her remains were discovered days later, confirming the worst fears of her grieving family. Throughout the years, Mendoza has fought to overturn his sentence through multiple appeals, but each attempt has been denied, and his execution date now looms near. His case remains one of the most disturbing in recent Texas history, a grim reminder of the state's stance on capital punishment. As the scheduled day approaches, no official information has been released regarding his final meal or last words. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, where we'll cover more scheduled executions and their stories. See you in the next video.